This is a memory chip, smaller than your fingernail, thinner than a sheet of paper, capable of storing more information than entire libraries held a generation ago. Samsung manufactures this particular chip, a 236-layer 3D NAND flash memory module, at their Pyeongtaek campus south of Seoul. This chip, and chips like it, store 78% of the world's data. Every photo you've uploaded, every message you've sent, every transaction you've made, exists on chips manufactured in South Korea. And 3 days ago, South Korea decided that China no longer gets access to them. On January 22, 2026, at 9 a.m. Seoul time, President Yoon Suk-yeol announced the Indo-Pacific Semiconductor Security Initiative, a trilateral agreement with Japan and Taiwan that creates an integrated chip alliance excluding China from advanced memory, logic, and packaging technologies. The initiative doesn't just restrict chip exports to China. It coordinates the three nations that collectively control 83% of advanced semiconductor manufacturing into a unified bloc that will share technology, align production, and jointly determine who receives chips and who doesn't. China is on the doesn't list. The announcement came with immediate implementation. Samsung and SK Hynix, which together control 72% of global memory chip production, suspended all shipments to Chinese customers pending security review of end-user applications. The review has no timeline. The suspension has no end date. This is not a trade restriction. This is technological decapitation. And Chinese tech giants have approximately 90 days of inventory before their servers stop storing and their phones stop functioning. Here's what they're not telling you. South Korea's chip leverage has been theoretical for years, acknowledged by analysts but never exercised. The hesitation was commercial. China represents 60% of Korean semiconductor exports. Samsung and SK Hynix earn approximately $47 billion annually from Chinese customers. Walking away from $47 billion requires extraordinary motivation. The motivation arrived in November 2025, when China's Ministry of State Security arrested 37 South Korean nationals working at semiconductor facilities in China. Engineers, managers, and executives accused of espionage and technology theft. The arrests were almost certainly fabricated, retaliation for Korean cooperation with American export controls. But fabricated or not, 37 Korean citizens sat in Chinese detention, facing trials in a legal system that convicts 99.9% of defendants. Korean diplomatic protests achieved nothing. Chinese officials offered to discuss the cases in exchange for reconsideration of discriminatory technology policies. The message was clear: your people for your chips. President Yoon chose a different response. At 11:30 a.m. Seoul time on January 22nd, I spoke with a senior official in Korea's Ministry of Trade who participated in the initiative's development. The official spoke on condition of anonymity. The arrest changed everything. China believed we would sacrifice strategic position to protect commercial relationships. They miscalculated. Koreans remember Japanese colonization. We understand what it means when a powerful neighbor believes they can dictate terms through hostage-taking. I asked about the commercial cost. $47 billion annually is significant. But Korean semiconductor companies will redirect sales to other markets: the United States, Europe, India, Southeast Asia. Demand for memory chips exceeds supply globally. We're not losing customers, we're choosing customers. I asked about the 37 detained citizens. Their situation is now worse. China will retaliate for the initiative by treating them harshly. We know this. They know this. The decision was made understanding that consequence. Sometimes sovereignty requires sacrifice. This is where the lie becomes unsustainable. China built its technology sector on the assumption that commercial interdependence would prevent supply disruptions. The assumption underpinned 20 years of industrial policy. China welcomed Korean semiconductor investment, encouraged technology partnerships, became the largest market for Korean chips. The integration was so deep that severing it seemed economically irrational. The assumption failed because it treated commercial relationships as purely commercial. It ignored the political dimensions, the security concerns, the historical grievances, the alliance structures that shape how nations behave when commercial interests conflict with strategic interests. The arrests were China's mistake. They revealed that China viewed the commercial relationship as leverage to be exploited rather than partnership to be preserved. Once revealed, Korean leaders faced a choice: accept subordination or reject dependence. They rejected dependence. At 2 p.m. Tokyo time on January 22nd, Japan's Prime Minister Ishida held a joint press conference with President Yoon, announcing Japan's participation in the initiative. Japan's semiconductor equipment industry, and Korea's semiconductor manufacturing industry are complementary. Together with Taiwan's foundry capabilities, we form a complete supply chain that serves partners who share our values. Those who do not share our values will not share our technology. The trilateral structure is the initiative's most significant feature. Previous semiconductor restrictions were bilateral: American controls on American technology, Dutch controls on Dutch lithography equipment. Each restriction had gaps that China could exploit through alternative suppliers. The initiative closes the gaps. Korea controls memory. Taiwan controls logic foundry. Japan controls equipment. Coordinating all three means China cannot substitute around any single restriction. At 4:30 p.m. Taipei time, Taiwan's President Lai confirmed Taiwan's participation through a video statement. Taiwan has faced Chinese aggression for decades. Korea and Japan now recognize what we have long understood. Economic integration with China creates vulnerabilities that China exploits. The initiative protects all three nations by ensuring our collective technological leadership cannot be used against us. The statement's reference to Chinese aggression was unusually direct for Taiwanese diplomatic communication. The directness signals that Taiwan views the initiative as security policy, not commercial policy. When three nations controlling 83% of advanced semiconductors coordinate to exclude a fourth nation, the market impacts are immediate and severe. At market open on January 23rd, Chinese technology stocks collapsed. SMIC, Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, minus 34%. BOE Technology, display panels, minus 28%. Lenovo, minus 23%. Xiaomi, minus 19%. Alibaba Cloud, minus 21%. Tencent, minus 16%. The declines reflected immediate assessment of what memory chip cutoff means for Chinese technology operations. Data centers require constant memory chip replacement. Failure rates run 2 to 4% annually, and capacity expansion requires continuous new chip deployment. Chinese cloud providers, Alibaba, Tencent, Huawei, Baidu, operate data centers containing approximately 47 million servers. Each server contains 8 to 16 memory modules. Annual replacement and expansion needs, approximately 180 million modules. Domestic Chinese memory production, approximately 23 million modules annually, and those modules are 2 generations behind Samsung and SK Hynix technology, unsuitable for high-performance computing applications. The gap between need, 180 million, and domestic supply, 23 million, inferior quality, represents the initiative's impact. 87% of Chinese data center memory requirements cannot be met domestically. At 6 p.m. Eastern on January 22nd, I spoke with the chief technology officer of a major Chinese internet company. He agreed to speak anonymously, his voice carrying exhaustion. We have 87 days of memory inventory at current consumption. After 87 days, we begin degrading services. After 120 days, we begin shutting down services. There is no domestic alternative. There is no alternative supplier. Samsung and SK Hynix are the market. I asked about workarounds. There are no workarounds at this scale. We could try to acquire chips through intermediaries, smuggling essentially. But Samsung is implementing end-user tracking that makes large-scale diversion detectable. We could try to extend existing inventory through reduced service levels, slower response times, reduced storage per user. But that destroys our competitive position against domestic rivals with better inventory positions. I asked about the political response. The government is meeting continuously. They will announce something: retaliation, countermeasures, patriotic alternatives. But announcements cannot manufacture memory chips. We are facing a technical problem that political solutions cannot address. Less than 90 days separate today from the point where Chinese data centers begin operational degradation. The timeline is determined by inventory levels, consumption rates, and the complete absence of alternative supply. The 90-day window creates strategic dynamics beyond the technology sector. Chinese military systems depend on the same memory chips as commercial applications. The PLA's command and control systems, surveillance networks, and weapons platforms all require high-density memory. Domestic production cannot meet military demand any more than it meets commercial demand. Military stockpiles extend timelines. The PLA maintains strategic reserves that commercial companies don't. But reserves deplete through consumption and component failure. Within 12 to 18 months, Chinese military technology faces the same constraints as commercial technology. The initiative's architects understand this. The coordination isn't just commercial, it's strategic. Degrading Chinese technology capabilities serves security objectives that exceed commercial value. At 8 a.m. Beijing time on January 23rd, China's Ministry of Commerce announced comprehensive review of economic relations with initiative participants and threatened countermeasures proportional to the hostile actions taken against Chinese technology development. The threat's vagueness revealed its emptiness. What countermeasures does China have? Rare earth restrictions, already partially implemented through the January 17th export controls, with effects that take years to fully manifest. Consumer goods restrictions, which harm Chinese manufacturers more than Korean or Japanese consumers. Financial sanctions, which require Chinese banks to sacrifice correspondent relationships with the global financial system. Military intimidation, which risks escalation to conflict that serves no Chinese interest. China's leverage is weaker than its rhetoric suggests. The asymmetry that created Korean semiconductor dominance is the same asymmetry that limits Chinese response options. At 11 a.m. Seoul time on January 23rd, Samsung's investor relations team held an emergency call to address shareholder concerns about lost Chinese revenue. We project $47 billion in annual Chinese revenue will be partially offset by $31 billion in redirected sales to other markets over 24 months. The net revenue impact is approximately $16 billion annually, significant but manageable given company reserves. More importantly, the initiative ends technology transfer to potential competitors who have explicitly targeted our market position. The framing transformed loss into investment. Samsung isn't losing China. Samsung is protecting its future from Chinese competition subsidized by Korean technology. SK Hynix released similar guidance. The stock prices of both companies, after initial decline on January 22nd, recovered 60% of losses by January 24th. Investors concluded that semiconductor security outweighed Chinese market access. The initiative includes provisions that extend beyond immediate export restrictions. Technology sharing protocols. Samsung, TSMC, and Japanese equipment manufacturers will share manufacturing process improvements through a joint research framework. The sharing accelerates innovation for alliance members while excluding China from the innovation cycle. Capacity coordination. The three nations will coordinate capital expenditure to prevent overcapacity that could pressure pricing. The coordination ensures profitability that funds continued R&D investment. Customer alignment. Companies wishing to purchase initiative-controlled semiconductors must certify that no product incorporating those semiconductors will be sold to China. The certification requirement forces global companies to choose sides. Access to initiative technology requires excluding Chinese customers. The customer alignment provision creates ripple effects beyond direct China sales. A German automaker using Samsung memory chips must certify those chips don't end up in Chinese vehicles. An American smartphone manufacturer using TSMC processors must certify Chinese market phones don't use those processors. The global technology supply chain is being partitioned. The initiative forces partition by making fence-sitting commercially impossible. What the informed understand is that the initiative represents the end of technology globalization. For 30 years, semiconductor supply chains operated on efficiency principles. Components manufactured wherever costs were lowest, sold wherever demand existed. The principles assumed that technology was commercially neutral, that innovation benefited everyone equally, that national security and commercial logic could be separated. The initiative rejects every assumption. Technology is strategic. Innovation advantages allies over adversaries. National security determines who receives chips, not commercial logic. The rejection isn't South Korean alone. The initiative coordinates 3 nations, 4 if you count American support that enabled the alliance. The rejection represents collective judgment that technology interdependence with China created unacceptable risks. That judgment, once reached, doesn't reverse when commercial pressures mount. The initiative's structure, trilateral, coordinated, institutionalized, makes reversal difficult even if individual governments change. South Korea elected a conservative government. Japan elected conservatives. Taiwan elected independence-oriented leadership. But the initiative would likely survive liberal or conciliatory governments because the institutional momentum now exceeds any individual leader's ability to reverse. At 3 p.m. Beijing time on January 24th, Chinese President Xi Jinping addressed the situation in a televised statement. Foreign forces seek to constrain China's technological development through discriminatory restrictions. They will fail. China possesses the talent, the resources, and the determination to achieve semiconductor self-sufficiency. The restrictions announced by Korea, Japan, and Taiwan will be remembered as the moment China accelerated past Western dependence. The statement was domestically necessary, but internationally unconvincing. China has pursued semiconductor self-sufficiency since 2014. A decade of effort and $150 billion in investment has produced capabilities 2 to 3 generations behind global leaders. The gap isn't closing, it's widening. Each year, Samsung and TSMC advance. Each year, SMIC and other Chinese manufacturers struggle to match where Samsung and TSMC were 3 years prior. The initiative ensures the gap continues widening. Without access to Korean memory, Taiwanese logic, and Japanese equipment, Chinese advancement slows further. Self-sufficiency becomes not a decade-long project, but a generation-long project. The memory chip in your phone weighs less than a gram. It stores more information than existed in the entire world a century ago. The engineering that created it represents human achievement at its most sophisticated, the manipulation of matter at atomic scales to create devices that extend human capability. That achievement concentrated in 3 nations not by accident, but by sustained investment, accumulated expertise, and institutional excellence that cannot be easily replicated. Korea's semiconductor industry represents $180 billion in cumulative capital investment since 1983. Japan's equipment industry represents $90 billion. Taiwan's foundry industry represents $250 billion. The total, $520 billion in patient, sustained compounding investment, cannot be matched by announcement, by appropriation, by political will alone. The initiative weaponizes that investment. The $520 billion becomes not just commercial asset, but strategic asset, capability that determines which nations participate in the technological future and which nations watch from outside. China is outside. The initiative places them there. The placement is not temporary. It is structural, coordinated, and reinforced by shared assessment of Chinese intentions. 90 days until Chinese data centers degrade. 18 months until Chinese military systems face constraints. A generation until Chinese self-sufficiency, if ever. The timelines describe not commercial disruption, but civilizational divergence. The nations inside the initiative advance together. The nation outside falls behind. The gap compounds annually. The memory chip weighs less than a gram. The strategic weight is measured in trillions of dollars, decades of development, and the future of technological civilization. South Korea chose which side of that future to stand on. China is discovering what it means to be on the other side. $47 billion in annual revenue, sacrificed. 37 citizens, imprisoned. The choice was made anyway. That is what semiconductor security means now. That is what technological sovereignty costs. The memory chip stores your data. The initiative stores the future. And the future just became unavailable to 1.4 billion people.